Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress by Dai C.G. Part 1, Chapter 4. A pinprick of light quivered in the darkness at the end of a long subterranean passage. The tiny bright dot wavered, fell, rose again, and continued its precarious advance. Now and then, when there was a dip in the floor, the dot disappeared for seconds at a time. The silence was broken only by the scraping of a heavy basket being hauled over the ground and the grunts of a man exerting himself to his limits. The sound reverberated in the inky tunnel, generating an echo that traveled great distances. When the light suddenly reappeared, it hovered in the air like the eye of some nightmarish animal whose body had been swallowed up by the darkness. It was Luo, wearing an oil lamp secured to his forehead, at work in what was known as the little coal mine. Where the passage was too low, he had got to get down on all fours and crawl. He was naked except for a harness with leather straps that cut deep into his flesh. This horrible contraption enabled him to drag a huge basket laden with chunks of anthracite behind him. When he reached me, I took over from him. I was naked too, my body covered in a film of coal dust, which sank into every fold of my skin. I preferred to push the basket instead of pulling it behind me as he did. Close to the pit face, there was a sizable ramp, but the ceiling was higher there. Luo would often help me work my cargo to the top and out of the tunnel. We would drop to the ground from exhaustion in the great cloud of dust raised by tipping the contents of the basket onto the coal heap. In olden times, the phoenix of the sky, as we have seen, was famed for its copper mines, which earned a place in Chinese history for having been given away in a generous gesture by China's first official homosexual, an emperor. Though the copper mines had fallen into disuse and ruin, coal mining continued on a small manual scale. The coal mines were collectively owned by all the peasants on the mountain and were exploited to meet the local demand for fuel. So it was hardly surprising that Luo and I, like the other city youths, were put to work underground for 2 months as part of our re-education. Even the success of our oral cinema didn't earn us a dispensation. To tell the truth, we accepted this infernal ordeal because we were determined to stay in the race at all costs, even though our chances of returning to the city were no more than the infinitesimal 3 in 1,000. We didn't know that our stint in the coal mine would mark us for the rest of our lives, physically and especially mentally. Even today, the fearful phrase, "the little coal mine," sends shivers down my spine. With the exception of the entrance, where there was a section about 20 meters long with a low ceiling supported by ill-fitting beams and props made of rough-hewn tree trunks, the tunnel, all 700 meters of it, lacked any protection whatsoever. There was a permanent danger of falling rock. The 3 old peasant miners whose job it was to hack at the coal seams were forever telling us of the fatal accidents that had befallen our predecessors. Each basketful full that we managed to haul all the way from the end of the tunnel became a game of Russian roulette. One day, as we were heaving a full basket of coal up on the final steep incline, I heard Luo say, "I don't know why, but from the moment we got here, I've had this idea stuck in my head that I'm going to die in this mine." Hearing this, my breath failed me. We continued climbing, but I suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. I'd become infected by the same idea as Luo. From that day on, I shared his terror of not leaving the place alive. During our time in the mine, Luo and I slept in the peasants' dormitory, a humble cabin clinging to the mountainside under a rocky outcrop. Waking up in the morning, I would hear the rain dripping from the rock onto the cabin roof, which was covered with bits of tree bark, and would console myself with the thought that at least I was still alive. But each morning, when leaving the cabin, I was terrified that I would not make it back there at night. The most trivial occurrence, someone's offhand remark, for instance, or a macabre joke, or just a change in the weather, became, in my eyes, a bad omen, a foreboding of death. I had visions sometimes while I was at work in the mine. The ground would become soft, I would have difficulty breathing, and I would feel as if I were on the brink of death, whereupon I saw my childhood race before me at breakneck speed, the way the dying are said to see their lives pass by in a flash. The rubbery ground stretched elastically with each step I took. Then there was a deafening roar overhead, as if the roof were about to cave in. Crazed with fear, I would get down on my hands and knees and crawl in the dark, with my mother and father's faces looming before my eyes. The vision lasted a few seconds, then it vanished as suddenly as it had come, leaving me in the desolation of the mine shaft, naked as a worm, struggling to heave my burden towards the exit. I fastened my eyes on the ground at my feet. In the flickering light of my pit lamp, I caught sight of a forlorn ant. It was advancing slowly and steadily, driven by the will to survive. One day was during our 3rd week here. I heard someone sobbing in the tunnel, but saw no light at all. It did not sound like grief, nor like the groans of a wounded man. It was more like someone weeping with passionate abandon. The sound bounced off the walls and echoed all the way to the other end of the shaft before subsiding into the shadows. I was sure it was Luo who was crying in the dark. At the end of the 6th week, Luo fell ill. It was malaria. One afternoon, when we were all sitting under a tree opposite the entrance to the tunnel eating some rice, he complained of feeling cold. Within minutes, his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't hold his chopsticks. He rose unsteadily to his feet and headed back to the dormitory to lie down, but could barely walk. His eyes were glazed. Standing before the open door of the cabin, he called out to no one in particular, "Let me in!" This was met with roars of laughter from the miners eating their rice under the tree. "Who are you talking to?" they wanted to know. "There's no one there." In the cabin that night, he was still complaining of the cold, despite several quilts and the coal burning in the big stove. The men launched into a long discussion in hushed voices. They debated whether they should take Luo to the river and dunk him in the icy water without telling him beforehand. They thought the shock would cure him. However, this proposal was turned down for fear of seeing him drown in the middle of the night. One of the men went outside and returned holding 2 branches. "One from a peach tree, the other from a willow," he told me. Only these trees would do, only these trees. He hauled Luo to his feet, stripped him of his jacket and other clothing, and started whipping his bare back with these 2 branches. "Harder!" cried the others, watching from the sidelines. "If you don't hit hard, you won't drive out the sickness." The branches whistled through the air as they swung, one after the other. The blows left livid weals on Luo's flesh, but my friend underwent the flogging impassively. Although he was conscious, it was as though he were in a dream, where it was all happening to someone else. I couldn't tell what he was thinking, but I was very anxious, and the remark he had made in the mine shaft a few weeks before came back to me, reverberating in the cruel whoosh of the branches. I've had this idea stuck in my head that I'm going to die in this mine. The man wielding the branches grew tired and asked for someone else to take over, but no one came forward. Overcome with fatigue, the men had gone to their bunks and wanted to sleep. I found myself holding the branches of peach and willow. Luo raised his head. His face was pale and forehead beaded with perspiration. His eyes had a faraway look when they met mine. "Go on," he said in a voice that was barely audible. "Shouldn't you take a rest?" I asked. "Look how your hands are trembling. Are they numb?" "Yes, they are," he said, raising one hand to his eyes for inspection. "You're right. I'm shivering and I'm cold, like an old man at death's door." I found a fag end at the bottom of my pocket, which I lit and offered to him, but it slipped from his fingers at once and fell to the ground. Too damn heavy, he said. Do you really want me to go on flogging you? Yes, it'll warm me up. Before complying with his wish, I thought I would retrieve the fallen cigarette and let him have a good smoke first. I bent over to pick up the fag end, which was still alight. Suddenly I spied something whitish lying on the floor by the foot of the bed. It was an envelope. I picked it up. The envelope, which was addressed to Luo, had not been opened. I asked the men where it came from. One of them replied from his bunk that it had been left earlier in the day by someone come to buy coal. I opened it. Inside I found a letter written in pencil. The characters were not evenly disposed on the page, and some of them were poorly drawn. Yet the erratic writing gave the impression of feminine sweetness, of childlike sincerity. I read it to Luo slowly. To Luo, the teller of films. Don't laugh at my handwriting. Unlike you, I did not attend middle school. You know that the nearest school is located in the town of Yongjing, and that it takes 2 days to get there from the mountain. I was taught to read and write by my father. You can class me among those who have completed elementary education. I heard not long ago that you and your friend are very good at relating what happens in films. I've been to see the headman of my village, and has agreed to send 2 farm workers to the little mine to take your place for a couple of days. Now you can come to our village to tell us a film. I wanted to go up to the mine to bring you the news myself, but was told that the men all go about naked there, and that the place is forbidden for girls. Thinking of the coal mine, I admire your courage. I keep my fingers crossed that it won't cave in. You'll be getting 2 days off. At least you won't be at risk during that time. See you soon. Say hello to your friend, the fiddler. The Little Seamstress. 08/07/1972. P.S. I just remember something funny I wanted to tell you. Since your visit, I've come across several people whose second toes are longer than their big toes, just like ours. I'm disappointed, but that's life.